Hi guys, Doug Kretz here again from lockdown in my quarantine home in Taipei. You can see this little place that I'm living in. It's a nice little Taipei apartment, not worth much, just a good place to stay and get out of the rain. It's the beginning of the plum rain season, and in Chinese culture and Taiwanese culture, this is the time of the year when people get really wet. There's rain that probably lasts between 3 months or 2 months, and it fills all the rice fields, and all the snakes get out of the water, and the frogs jump out of the water, and everything. And for a little while, Taipei turns into a wonderful natural wonderland. But I'm not here to talk to you about nature and rain. I'm here to talk to you about memorizing poetry and why it's important to actually memorize poems. The reason why I want to bring this up is because a very long time ago, for my English classes, I had to memorize poems. And I found that the exercise of learning a poem actually enhanced my mental powers in one respect, in the sense that when I paid attention to the lines, when I memorized them, and I actually developed a sense for each line and remembered each word in each line, I developed not only a deeper sense of the poem, but I was also able to kind of develop a deeper appreciation of who the writer was writing to and who the writer himself or herself was. It was really an exercise in empathy, which I believe is an emotional but mental superpower. I'll get into that in a little bit, and I'll do that after I actually recite a poem that I have learned. The poem that I had to learn back in university that I still know today is W.B. Yeats's When You Were Old. Now, I think all you really have to know about this poem is that it was written to a woman named Maud Gonne, and it was written during a time in Yeats's life when he had become kind of a literary celebrity, and he was also somebody who was quite involved in Ireland's struggle for independence. So he was kind of a big deal. She was kind of a big deal. She was a wealthy woman who had some involvement in this sort of disposition. The other thing you had to know about it is that actually she rejected him, I think, more than 3 times when he proposed marriage to her. So he really wanted to get married to her. She didn't really like the idea very much. And poor old Yeats kind of had to like shirk off into the distance and never really found the true love that he said that he had. So I will try to recite this poem, and then I'll talk about why it's a good thing for students and people who are trying to develop their skills as a writer to memorize poems. All right. I'm really not looking at any screen. I can't show you, but I don't have the poem on a screen. I may miss a line or two, but if you go look up When You Were Old, and I actually put the copy here in the notes, you'll see that I did my very best to try to remember these lines. And it's been about more than 20 years since I actually first memorized it. Okay, so here it goes. Let's see if I can do it. When You Are Old by W.B. Yeats. When you are old and gray and full of sleep, take down this book and slowly read, and dream of the soft look your eyes had once, and of their shadows deep. How many men loved you in your moments of glad grace, with love either false or true? But one man loved the pilgrim soul in you. And bending down beside the glowing bars, remember a little sadly how love fled, and went wandering on the mountains overhead, and hid his face in a crowd of stars. It's kind of a romantic poem, actually, but it's really a big dig at Maud because Maud rejected him. It's basically, if you go through line by line, he's saying, look, you're really young right now, you look pretty hot. A lot of men have loved you, or they've said that they've loved you. Some of it has been false. Some of it has probably been true. Hint, 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 hint. But really, you're only thinking about today and what happens when you get old, right? You had these beautiful eyes with the very deep shadows, very sultry kind of woman. But when you get older, that's not really going to work in your favor. And maybe these men who loved you with love false or true are probably not going to show up at your doorstep anymore. And you're kind of going to be alone, and actually going to pull down this book that I wrote, that has this poem that I wrote, and you're going to remember that this guy loved you for everything that you had and everything that you meant to him. But you rejected him, and actually, sorry to say, you're just an old lady reading a book, but I am this hero who helped Ireland win its freedom and establish itself as a republic by separating from the British. And actually, I'm immortalized forever, just like in the stars. So sorry about that. So a little bit of a sarcastic poem, not too sarcastic. But why is it important to actually memorize a poem? Now, at your age, and I'm assuming people watching this are parents of high school kids or parents of kids who are getting ready to go to college, who have had to have English and literature classes, you've probably been asked by your teacher to memorize a poem. And there's probably been a whole list of reasons why they think it's important. It could be because we want you to appreciate art more deeply. We want you to enhance your memory powers. We want you to show us that you're actually learning something and that you're not just reading through stuff on a page and just telling us what we want to hear. All of that is kind of like halfway to the truth. I think all of those things are pretty decent reasons why you should memorize a poem. It does help you to understand literature more deeply because you can understand and hold in your head the sound of a line, the different particular words. When you're trying to memorize something, you do have to look something up and you do have to figure out what it means, right? You do have to show people that you're learning in English literature, so you should memorize a poem, get it as right as you can, and then you're really going to need to get a good grade so you can go off to college. But these are none of the reasons why I think learning a poem and memorizing a poem are important. I know people who know hundreds of poems, and they could cite to you a line in a particular stanza, and these are really smart people. But what's even more important than the actual rote memorization of this stuff is that they have an appreciation for the thing that is most important in poetry. And the thing that is most important in poetry is that poems are literally, I think, vessels of human emotion. And when you've taken the time to memorize a poem, not only have you internalized something that is with you forever, you've internalized an ability to understand somebody else's point of view. And that is the superpower. Some people call this empathy, and they use it in a very casual sense. They say, oh, well, you have empathy for other people, you care about other people. So sometimes they actually confuse empathy with sympathy, which is the care of other people. But what goes missing in this description of empathy is what empathy truly is. It's actually the ability to feel what somebody else feels. There's probably no clearer way to do that than to actually, aside from VR, wearing a VR headset, to step into their shoes emotionally by using the very same words that they used, right? A lot of our time is spent listening to somebody talk to you, right? You listen to me and you're processing what I'm saying, and I listen to you and I'm trying to process what you're saying. And if you know anything about conversations, sometimes people don't even listen to each other very well. They cut each other off, or they're only listening so that they have a chance to respond. They want to be heard. Poetry slows everything down, and the memorization of poetry puts that person's word choice in your head, and really, in some sense, in your heart, whatever that metaphysical heart is, that memory, that place of storage of an emotion, of a history, of a memory, right? That gives you some response or some resemblance to somebody else's feelings. And what I mean by that, I know that sounds really abstract, so let me try to make it very simple. Life experience is made out of making mistakes, falling in love, falling out of love, witnessing people die, or you're losing something, losing a house, losing money, losing a job, losing a friend. And you have a deeply personal experience with that. And if you're like a lot of people, myself included, that emotional experience is sometimes without language. There's no way to really understand or convey to somebody else how you're feeling. And if you've ever tried to explain to somebody, and like when you're really deeply grieved or when you deeply are happy about something, you're just sort of at a loss for words. You can't really say something. It becomes easier to say things about how you feel when you start learning how other people who have an expert ability to do it have said it. So if you memorize a poem, what you're really doing is you're slipping into the skin of somebody who has had an experience that might be similar to something that you've had, but have given such carefully chosen words to it that in some sense it makes you feel comfortable with that lived emotion. And you're living it through them. You're sort of having their experience with them. How can any of this be useful to you outside of academics and outside of sort of English homework? Well, I think continuing to practice that empathy, reading other people's writing, trying to memorize it, getting into their skin, so to speak, makes you really good at not only communication, but even some forms of decision making. So this can be very useful to you if you're in a job. It could be very useful to you if you're running for mayor. It could be very useful if you're trying to give a presentation in front of a group of colleagues or a group of friends. You're not always sitting there isolated. And you're not always sitting there trying to guess what other people are saying or thinking to themselves, right? You have a much clearer picture of the range of emotions that people go through. And when you're processing what you're trying to say or what decision you're trying to make, you can run through these scenarios in your head almost as second nature. I don't mean you're going to sit there and go through the poem and be like, well, what would have Yeats done for this accounting problem that I have to present to my boss? I don't mean that. It's more about the intuitive, innate sense of an emotional spectrum and the words and the language you need to convey that spectrum and that precise moment of decision making to somebody else. So yeah, at the end of the day, poems are really wonderful to learn because of what they say about the human experience. They're really good to learn and memorize because it boosts your brain power and your memory power. But ultimately, they're hugely important to being a human being and understanding life's experiences through other people's perspectives. And if you have that skill, if you have that superpower, you can help other people and you can be a wonderful human being that makes life on the planet easier for other people as well. So that's my little lesson with Yeats, and I hope you enjoyed it. Go out and learn a poem, memorize it, and I don't know, leave a comment and tell me which one you learned.